How is Mars about to shake up politics in the United States? Very simply, by going retrograde just 9 days before the midterm elections. Welcome to Global Trends and Cycles. I'm Marie Sheppel, and this video looks at how Mars retrograde in 2022 will stir up both conservative and crazy types just prior to the election. But that's not even as significant as what happens when Mars returns to direct motion. We'll look at that later in this video. Mars goes retrograde at 25 degrees 36 minutes Gemini on October 30th, and it will spend several weeks very near the U.S. natal Mars at 21 degrees Gemini in October and November, in the period surrounding the midterm election. And Election Day, November 8th, is a total lunar eclipse. Voters, represented by the Moon, which is in Taurus and conjunct Uranus, will exhibit a strange combination of conservatism and liberalism. But with the Moon in Taurus, the sign which rules money and possessions, voters will have their finances and creature comforts uppermost in their minds. But that doesn't mean that they're looking at things on the short term. On the contrary, with the Saturn-Uranus square grinding away in the background and now forming a T-square with the eclipse, people will be more strategic in their choices. The full moon eclipse aligns with the Mercury-Uranus opposition. The Sun is conjunct Mercury in Scorpio, and the Moon is conjunct Uranus in Taurus. Voters want what's practical, Moon in Taurus, and they want value for their money and efforts, Sun and Mercury in Scorpio. Furthermore, Mercury and Mars are in mutual reception on Election Day, as Mercury in Scorpio, ruled by Mars, and Mars is in Gemini, ruled by Mercury. Believe it or not, voters may reject extreme views and agendas. The Moon is in Taurus, and despite it being conjunct Uranus, it wants stability, financial security, but most of all, it wants continuity. As the antics of Mars retrograde and out of bounds are aligned with the Sun and Mercury, and voters are represented by the peace-loving Taurus Moon, voters may be fed up with anything or anyone who displays or encourages angry outbursts, and they go for candidates whom they feel can produce peaceful economic abundance. Extreme events in October may move voters to the center and away from the culture wars more than ever. Still, they want change, or what's more likely, they want leaders who will push forward with practical changes. And as Saturn goes direct at 18 degrees Aquarius on October 23rd, right on President Biden's progressed Sun, Biden may show decisiveness in a decision or situation in October that appeals to voters' practical side. For October 30th, the day Mars goes retrograde, note that the progressed Moon, 28 degrees Aquarius, is on the anticion of progressed Saturn, 2 degrees Scorpio, and transiting Mercury is conjoining progressed Saturn. Progressed Venus, 3 degrees Taurus, opposes this Mercury-Saturn pair. So the progressed Moon and transiting Mercury, both of which are used for timing in astrology, are triggering a potential in the opposition of progressed Venus to progressed Saturn. Venus-Saturn aspects usually represent loss, either of money or love. As the Federal Reserve meets on November 1st and 2nd, just 2 days after Mars goes retrograde, its decisions and guidance could bring stunning reversals in the stock market. So this progressed Venus-Saturn configuration indicates that their financial prospects are suddenly at the top of voters' agenda. Note that Capricorn-Saturn rules the U.S. second house of the economy and financial system. And Venus is the natural ruler of the second house. Furthermore, progressed Venus is in Taurus, the sign associated with the second house. It's the progressed moon, reinforcing the natal moon in the late degrees of Aquarius, that is the key motivator for voters. The Saturn-Uranus square, which seems as if it has lasted forever, greatly affects that progressed moon, as Saturn and Uranus are the co-rulers of Aquarius. The transiting Uranus square, in turn, is affected by the progressed Venus-Saturn opposition, as Saturn in Aquarius is ruled by itself, and Uranus in Taurus is ruled by Venus. So the progressed moon also indicates that voters' main concern is their financial and employment prospects. Progressed Mars, retrograde in Libra, is also ruled by Venus, and progressed Mars is the agitator here, so to speak. What could be very good for incumbent leadership in the upcoming election is an aspect triangle that forms in fall 2022. Transiting Saturn, 18 degrees Aquarius, and progressed Mars, 17 degrees Libra, form a 120-degree, 90-degree, 150-degree triangle with transiting Uranus, 17 degrees Taurus. Saturn stationing direct on October 23rd at 18 degrees 35 minutes Aquarius, and the Moon-Mercury conjunction the next day in the 10th house, conjunct progressed Mars, trigger this aspect triangle. Transiting Mercury in the 10th of government and also ruler of the 10th gives more weight to established leadership, the incumbent candidates, which the 10th represents. Young people are also very important for both the election and the economy at this time. The Supreme Court begins a new session in October, and this aspect triangle involving progressed Mars indicates a lot of pushback against the court. Young people especially are aggrieved by the court's recent decisions, and these decisions are a focus of the election. If there are further Supreme Court decisions which people see as taking the country backward, people will revolt with their vote. And this is not on an ideological basis, but practical concerns about economic opportunities. Many people see the court's decisions as limiting opportunities for their own personal situation. Putting it all together, there may be a backlash against candidates whom voters view as supporting what the court is doing. I have an upcoming video on how Mars retrograde affects the chart of the Supreme Court, so be sure to subscribe and check back to view it. As transiting Mars goes retrograde, it squares the U.S. progressed Neptune, 26 degree Virgo, conjunct the midheaven, and transiting Neptune, 23 degrees Pisces, forms a T-square with them. This is very draining of liquidity and also of opportunity. And as transiting Neptune is hovering around the cusp of the 4th house, which is a sector of a mundane chart that is very indicative of weather and climate events, it could mean flash flooding that causes great losses, as represented by the progressed Venus-Saturn opposition. Note that Taurus Venus rules the 6th house of the food supply, so there could be crop losses. The 6th house also represents the country's labor force, and there could continue to be labor shortages despite a slowing economy. And of course, due to transiting Mars, moving back and forth over the U.S. natal Mars, 21 degrees Gemini, as it slows down and turns retrograde, and Mars rules firearms, and Neptune rules delusional people, there could be another rash of mass shootings. So don't go to school or the mall or the grocery store in this time period, but please do vote. These rash events in October will sway voters. Speaking of delusional people, Donald Trump's natal Sun-Uranus conjunction in Gemini is conjunct the U.S. natal Mars. That means transiting Mars passes over his Sun and Uranus repeatedly as Mars appears to slow down and go retrograde, with the effect lasting from September 10th to November 24th, 2022. With the multiple aspects of Mars and Neptune at this time, involving the natal, progressed, and transiting positions of these planets, Mr. Trump will likely be trumpeting his tale of woe as he campaigns for some candidates. But with transiting Saturn going direct in Aquarius just a week before Mars goes retrograde, he may be facing even more problems with the courts than he is now, with the consequences of prior actions becoming painfully evident. Aries Mars rules his ninth house of interaction with courts, and transiting Mars in Gemini is trine his progressed Jupiter, the planet associated with judges and courts of law, which is at 24 degrees Libra, the sign of justice. Progressed Jupiter squares his natal Venus-Saturn conjunction in Cancer, which indicates losses. Note his progressed Saturn, 3 degrees 22 minutes Leo. It forms a T-square with the U.S. progressed Venus-Saturn opposition, falling in the U.S. ninth house of the judiciary. For one thing, Mr. Trump won't like the karma that this brings. Saturn is karma, and he will bray loudly about how supposedly oppressed he is. For another thing, this indicates he's not as popular as he once was, and his style is losing its ability to resonate with people outside his circle of diehard fans. Saturn is boredom, not just karma or responsibility. People are bored by him now, but that doesn't mean his former fans have changed their politics. It just means they've switched their focus to other politicians now. Overall, voters want changes that give them greater opportunities, or at least preserve the opportunities and rights they already have. Mars is out of bounds when he goes retrograde in the fickle sign of Gemini, so voters may switch allegiances suddenly just prior to the election due to wild events in October. As crazy and chaotic as the situation is when Mars goes retrograde, it becomes heavy-handed when Mars returns to direct motion on January 12, 2023 at 8 degrees 7 minutes Gemini. Not only does Mars conjoin the U.S. natal Uranus and descendant as it returns to direct motion, but it triggers the Saturn-Pluto conjunction of 2020 all over again. That is because Mars at 8 degrees Gemini is on the contra-anticyon point of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which occurred at 22 degrees Capricorn. Thus, Mars will trigger the Saturn-Pluto conjunction again, probably setting a fire under all of its authoritarian potential. Now, this antecedent configuration applies to all countries, as it's all by transits, but it's critical for the U.S., as that smart alecky transiting Mars in Gemini conjoins the U.S. natal Uranus. It's also critical for China, and especially the Chinese Communist Party. Mars going direct on the contra-anticyon of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction acts like an opposition to those planets. There is a situation brewing which will trigger the ire of authoritarian types or embolden authoritarian regimes. The U.S. may flex its muscles forcefully in response to this situation. It will confront others, perhaps both allies and enemies, with respect to its security, and the U.S. will have the upper hand. Uranus is a very powerful planet, especially when he is fed up and acts decisively. Mars going direct, conjunct natal Uranus, indicates that the U.S. wants to wipe away chaotic situations that were aggravated by events under Mars retrograde. Note that Sun is conjunct the position of the 2020 Saturn-Pluto conjunction on the day that Mars goes direct. Of course, the Sun is always at 22 degrees Capricorn on January 12th, further emphasizing the potential of that conjunction. Leo Sun rules the 9th house of the judiciary in the U.S. chart. Aries Mars rules the 5th house of sexual relationships and fertility. The American people may be quite shocked by another Supreme Court ruling in early January 2023, probably pertaining to limits on their most personal relations in a new ruling very near January 12th. I give more detail on the court's upcoming decisions in my next video on Mars retrograde. Another thing that this Mars retrograde period affects is the Russian-Ukrainian war. In fact, it played a part in triggering it, and unfortunately may increase the intensity of the war in the last quarter of 2022 and into early 2023. In October and November 2022, as Mars appears to really begin slowing down to go retrograde, it passes over the U.S. natal Mars, 21 degrees Gemini, twice. As it does so, it is trine progressed Mercury, 21 degrees Aquarius. Something concerned with international relations is going on. Mercury rules the U.S. 7th house of diplomacy, foreign allies and enemies. In early October, transiting Venus, 3 degrees Libra, opposes transiting Jupiter, 3 degrees Aries, forming a T-square with natal Venus, 3 degrees Cancer. The Venus-Jupiter opposition points to the U.S. ascendant and the 11th house of groups. It may be that U.S. involvement in NATO ramps up in October and November out of necessity. Just a quick look at NATO's chart shows that Mars retrograde station occurs right on NATO's progressed Sun, 25 degrees Gemini, and natal Uranus, 26 degrees Gemini. The Mars-Uranus North Node triple conjunction of August 1st lands in NATO's first house, which is ruled by Aries Mars in this sunrise chart, indicating that NATO may feel compelled to act more forcefully in the Russian-Ukrainian war. Note also that when Mars returns to direct motion on January 12 at 8 degrees Gemini, it will be conjunct NATO's progressed Mercury and progressed Mars, and opposing natal Chiron, 8 degrees Sagittarius. This increases the pressure for NATO to act, as both of Mars retrograde and direct stations hit volatile points in NATO's chart. All of this indicates that NATO's manpower and arsenal are beefed up in the last quarter of 2022. With Mars direct also conjunct the U.S. natal Uranus, it would seem that the U.S. takes a bigger role in the effort to push back Russia, perhaps committing more money to shared defenses. The 8-degree Gemini position of Mars has a powerful Jupiter influence behind it. So the U.S. may be very generous, which, of course, with its natal Venus-Jupiter conjunction, it usually is. But the U.S. sees splashing out money like this as necessary for its defense, especially with respect to shared assets that may be overseas, such as military bases and personnel, and also putting resources into shoring up its own armed forces. But I don't foresee the U.S. committing new troops to this effort, not with progressed Saturn putting a check on progressed Venus in Taurus, the ruler of the U.S. 6th house of the armed forces. Thank you for joining me today. Please subscribe, And check out my other videos on Mars retrograde and other topics. Bye for now.